Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, I didn't do a video yesterday because it was Sunday, but today is not Sunday, it's Monday. Now, the good book says we're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath, and presidents don't really exactly get to do that, but God understands, I'm sure, about how presidents don't get to do that. However, what presidents can do is not make YouTube videos on Sundays, so that's what I went and did. Now, at this point, the Secret Service did finally get in contact with me. And what they were able to tell me was very, very interesting in certain ways. Apparently, the reason I haven't been able to find any videos of those events is it is being deliberately suppressed while the Supreme Court argues vehemently behind closed doors without any official announcement one way or the other whether or not this violates the separation of church and state. There is no answer about that yet, and there will be no official word from the government at all if they decide against it. Now, the Secret Service didn't actually say I shouldn't make a video about it, or that I should make a video about it, or anything. And I have decided to do so anyway, in part because I have always felt that it is important for the president, or president-elect in my case, to be honest with the nation about what is going on in it. I do have a group of Secret Service people. They are renting all of the verbos or whatever in the surrounding neighborhoods. There's apparently a total of 100 of them or so, keeping very close eye on the entire area at the moment, now that they've figured out where exactly I live, which apparently only took them like 3 days, but they decided to not contact me until yesterday for reasons that I don't pretend to understand yet. They will doubtless be explained to me later. I probably am not allowed to explain them to you, just kind of in general, because it would violate the National Secrets Act or something similar. But yeah, that's why they had not previously contacted me about it, or any of this regardless of which specific part that you're talking about. That's why we hadn't been contacted, and I hadn't been told, and so on, about these events, because it is, completely unprecedented, and apparently the Supreme Court is already arguing about whether or not I am or am not allowed to be president on constitutional grounds. So, yeah, that's your update on that matter. Moving on from there, this video is probably going to be a little bit shorter than my normal ones. There's a lot to talk about, but plenty of time to talk about it later, whether or not the Secret Service actually does, in point of fact, say that I should be president or shouldn't, more accurately, whether the Supreme Court decides I should or shouldn't be president. The Supreme Court is not the, the Praetorian Guard of ancient Rome. They don't get to choose the president. That's not how this works. But here's to hoping, right? Here's to hoping. So, for the moment, I am in my workshop. What you are seeing here is a old starting motor for a Honda of some ilk, doubtless taken out of its car when it broke down in some manner. As you can see, there are some parts that are no longer fully attached. What I was originally planning to do with it before I discovered I needed some of those parts that are no longer attached to do what I was originally planning to do with it was turn it into a generator. And I'm still going to, if I can, but we're gonna figure out whether or not that's possible later on. That is not a matter for today. Today, the reason I'm using this here as the backdrop for the video is because, in a lot of ways, America is like the engine of a vehicle. This is the part that gets it moving. Now, there's a lot of argument about whether or not the starting motor is or isn't what specific thing in real life when you're using America is a car engine metaphor kind of a thing. Is it big business? Is it small business? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it the government? Is it endless arguments? No two people can agree, and no firm answers are typically ever reached. And that is a little bit of a problem when you're trying to run a country, because no firm answers ever being reached means you don't get firm answers to such questions, which are being raised at all because at least a large segment of the country considers those questions of critical and significant importance to the well-being of the country. They wouldn't be asking them in the first place if they didn't. And so not getting those answers becomes a problem because you don't know which way to go if you can't read the map. Now, obviously, I have my own firm opinions about which of these things is or isn't the starting motor of the economy, of the country's socio-political demographics, and so on and so forth, which we may go over in future videos. But for the moment, really what I think is more important than knowing which one is or isn't the starting motor of the engine is knowing that the overall engine that is America is, in a lot of ways, right now, already broken. It doesn't work. Rather like that old Honda starter you see over there, no. It is not actually functional right now. There are entire components of that engine missing. All we've got right there is the starting motor. And while we could theoretically convert that into a generator, it doesn't even have the parts we need to do that with it, so we've got to find no parts. And that's where we get back to the whole American cultural discussion we've been having in these videos so far. We are not working as a culture right now. Things are not successful. We're not stable. We're not making progress the way we need to be. And this previous election reflects that in oh so many ways, which led to the whole, divine intervention incident where I am proclaimed president by the will of God, and the fact that the Supreme Court is even bothering to debate whether or not that is valid should prove to a lot of y'all that things are already broken in this country on multiple levels. America has for a very long time enjoyed a fair amount of favoritism from God when God thinks we are in doing his work in the world. Now, equally, something that is clear is that God has a multi-pronged approach here to this whole choosing me as president. Either I am acclaimed as president, and therefore, since I am in favor of separation of church and state, the separation of church and state is reaffirmed by my being chosen as president, because I will be in favor of separation of church and state and work very hard to make that be brought back to American jurisprudence as a core value, or by using the separation of church and state to deny my presidency, the Supreme Court will be equally forced to reaffirm the separation of church and state in their own minds in a way that prevents its further erosion by the Supreme Court, and ipso facto, God wins that way. He's got them in a catch-22. They cannot win without using the separation of church and state to stop me being president. If they use the separation of church and state to win in that way, that reaffirms the separation of church and state. If I am made president, I will fight to reaffirm the separation of church and state. Either way, they lose. So the people specifically trying to erode the separation of church and state lose in this context. So there you go. God has already beaten them, and I mean, who is surprised by this? That he's the person they worship, and he's against them. Of course he's going to win. Duh. Anyone who didn't see that one coming isn't as smart as they think they are. So there you go. That is why I am, I am in this position right here where technically, apparently I am actually the president-elect, but that information is being suppressed while the Supreme Court argues about whether or not that is legally possible as a way to prevent there being an ongoing civil war. Now, if they do decide that I should not be president because they wish to choose to reaffirm the separation of church and state in that manner, then obviously that information will continue to be suppressed and I'll look like a complete lunatic buffoon, which honestly I'm pretty okay with that. People have thought I was a complete lunatic buffoon since I was a young man, so the fact that they will continue to think I'm a complete lunatic buffoon for making these videos is, a difference that makes no difference is no difference, so yeah, if they, regardless of why they think I'm a complete lunatic buffoon, I was comfortable with them believing that, wrongly, of course, before. I will continue to be comfortable with them believing that wrongly hereafter. Nothing has actually changed in that regard. So, but back to the whole bit about America's culture being its engines of progress. America's culture right now is broken. A large number of its components just are not working as intended. They are completely broken. They have broken down. They have failed. And now, here's the thing with, the whole progressive ideology and never wanting to go backwards. Yes, ideally one should not go backwards, but when the parts that you are presently using have very clearly broken down, and you have these spares, even if they are backwards parts that you've already replaced because they weren't working that great, if the ones you're presently using are so broken that they don't work at all, even if the ones that you used to use that weren't working great worked at all, that's still an improvement against what you're using right now. So, bolt on those old parts to keep things running while you try to engineer some new and better parts that will work, even though, that is going backwards. Sometimes you have to backtrack in order to continue to make progress. Ideally, of course, you would, as with the metaphor that we were using the other day, you would dig through the blockage to keep going. But if the engine of the digging machine has just totally broken, that's not going to work. You've got to bolt on the old parts to keep digging at all. It goes back to something that we used to say a lot in this country in many areas during earlier eras where things were not so great with the economy and so on. Use it up, wear it out, make do, or do without. That's the point we're at here. We have to use whatever we can find that does work in order to keep going to the point where we can reach something that will work better. Right now, we are digging through a whole mess of trash looking for a way out of this part of the trash pile that is history. If we find some good parts in there that we can bolt on in place of the old ones that we wanted to discard because they weren't doing so great, even though they were working, they weren't working great, okay, fine, yeah, sure, let's do that. But we shouldn't be relying on that, and we shouldn't be trying to keep going with these broken parts that are breaking other parts of the machine because they aren't working right. That is crazy talk. That is something that is going to get us all killed if we keep insisting these parts are better even though they very clearly are not actually functional. And that's basically the situation we find ourselves in. We are having a lot of trouble because we cannot bring ourselves to admit that these new parts we've engineered for the machine of the culture have actually failed us. They are not functioning as intended. They are inferior to the old ones, but we want to keep making progress, and we're not recognizing that maybe our engineering skills aren't actually up to the task of completely redesigning this engine piece by piece without thoroughly examining what works and what doesn't about the old pieces before we try to change things. Right now, we have identified a lot of problems with our culture. The racism, the sexism, the other part that we didn't identify very clearly previously, I think, is that the sexism ran both ways. Men have their place in society. Men are needed. Women can do a lot of things that men can, and in fact, almost everything that men can, except create children without men. And we let this kind of radical anti-male messaging run rampant for too long without recognizing that, okay, this isn't progress, it's just shifting the blame. Instead of stopping playing the blame game, we're just changing who we're blaming here. That's not progress, that's just switching teams. Progress would be stopping with the blaming one gender for society's ills, not just changing which gender we blame for the ills of society. Used to be a lot of men who were in leadership positions back then blamed women for everything that was wrong with society, and that just was a flat-out lie. And now it's going the other way, and that too is a flat-out lie. You're not fixing anything if all you're doing is shifting who gets blamed for everything that goes wrong. You're still covering up the fact that there is something fundamentally and profoundly wrong with the culture as a whole that is making it less than perfect, less than ideal, and perfection also must be acknowledged to be at least a little bit unattainable if you want to try to approach a perfected state, because trying to achieve absolute perfection is doomed to fail from the start because the world and the people in it are imperfect. You cannot get a perfect result with imperfect tools. And in this context, when you're talking about shaping cultures, human beings are the tools, and as we all know, human beings are imperfect. So that being the case, you are doomed to fail before you even begin. And people did not very clearly recognize that fact. They acted like they were perfect and therefore they could fix all of society's problems, but that's just not true. Humans are not like that. We cannot fix everything until we can fix ourselves, and there are never enough of us that are able to fix ourselves enough to fix everything for everybody else. And that's something that people really seem to have struggled with. This idea that perfection is unattainable, but that doesn't mean you should try to attain it, because getting closer to perfection, even if it is an unreachable goal, is a worthy endeavor unto itself. So, with all of this being the case, if the engine of society is presently broken, we do have some of these old spare parts that we can still just bolt back on and see if the engine starts running a little better, and try removing some parts, replacing them with some of the old ones until things start running the way they're supposed to be a little bit more, without just completely disassembling everything down to the engine block and starting from scratch. That is something that some people appear to be advocating for. Some people are advocating replace all the parts that aren't working perfectly with their old counterparts, even though those old counterparts didn't work perfectly either, because, I don't know, they just feel like things were better in the old days, which, yeah, I mean, that's true, they were, but it's not that we didn't have a perfectly working engine after the old days when we did back then. The engine didn't work perfectly then, it just worked a little better, and part of that was that we had higher grades of fuel in terms of economic opportunities and stuff to feed into it that we just don't. We've run out of that. And that also is something we need to look at. I mean, if you've run out of something needed to keep the engine running at top performance, you do not give it lower grade stuff if you want that engine to stay well maintained. You give it what it needs, and that means you've got to go get what it needs, and that means that we really need to look into where we can source some of these opportunities for advancement and economic growth that we used to have that are pretty much used up right now. I think I've got some answers for that. Case in point, everybody hates on Elon Musk for a large number of reasons, most of which he deserves, especially the whole Twitter fiasco. My dude, they were tracking your jet, so you bought the entire platform? That seems like a very anti-social sort of move. But he is right about one thing, and that's the big opportunities for economic advancement have largely run out here on Earth. Anyone who believes that infinite growth is possible under finite resources is either insane or an economist. So if that is not possible, because economists believing that is no different from insanity effectively, why don't we just make the resources not finite anymore? That's not that hard. All we've got to do is tap into the resource opportunities of the asteroid belt, and we've got raw resources for decades, maybe centuries. Just they're sitting there waiting for us to go get them. Why haven't we? It's really that straightforward in a lot of ways. And that is something that Elon has very much recognized. He's like, the opportunities for new resource extraction, genuinely, absolutely new resource extraction, are largely played out here on Earth. We know that from the modern oil industry's activities being based around what they call closology, where you are likely to find new oil deposits nearby to pre-existing, already known of oil deposits. Genuinely untapped, unexplored oil deposits, the oil industry itself has largely given up on looking for them. That tells us there isn't much left that hasn't really been tapped into and used, or at least the conditions under which you can find it have not already been discovered, and some of the larger overall deposit exploited. So, therefore, we should be looking beyond the atmosphere of Earth for genuinely new resource deposits to exploit. And that tells me that out there, out in the galaxy, is where our future lies. That if we want to maintain a complex industrialized society, we have to break the jaws of the Finity Trap. We already broke the jaws of the Malthusian Trap with the invention of synthetic fertilizers that had kept humanity bound down for so long in terms of numbers and innovation potential. Now we have to break the jaws of the resource trap, and to do that, we've got to get out into the solar system and eventually beyond the solar system to gather resources from outer space. Elon has recognized that, and I applaud him for that. A lot of the other stuff he's done is a little more questionable, but in that way, he's doing well. He has recognized that staying stuck on Earth is a doomed scenario for our civilization, and so we've got to get beyond Earth if we want to continue to make progress. That is something that most Republican and other leadership for a very long time have not been in favor of. Like, and I'm not just singling out the Republicans here, most leadership of every nation, regardless of political party, has seen outer space as a frippery, a frill, a way to distract the masses from the real issues here on Earth. But it's just not. It is our future. It is our survival at stake. We don't get off this rock, sooner or later another really big rock comes hurtling in on an unpredictable orbit at a significant fraction of C and destroys us all. So what we've got to do here is we've got to go beyond the Earth, beyond the Earth's limited resources, out into the broader galaxy and get the resources that are just hanging there in space, waiting for those with the vision to go claim them for their nation, their planet, their whatever. Now, we do not know if there might be aliens out there. I mean, probably somewhere. The universe is a very, very big place, unutterably vast. And that may be why we haven't run into them, because it's just so unutterably vast that entire species could rise and fall before they would ever make contact with each other. What if, like, there are no aliens in this galaxy, but in Andromeda there's, like, 2 other alien species? Full sapients, they could talk to us and we could talk to them if we would ever meet. But Andromeda is literally millions of light years from our galaxy, maybe billions or trillions of light years. There is no way we are ever going to run into them, because exceeding the speed of light is so just completely impossible that there's no way for us to reach each other to have a conversation in the first place, not even to get in range for, like, light speed level communications, radio waves and the like, to allow any meaningful communication between us. What if that's what's going on? Now, there are alternate solutions that might theoretically make it possible even under those conditions. If you've played a little game called RimWorld, you will know that it might be possible to traverse such a distance via the utilization of some kind of hyper sleep chamber to keep people basically semi-frozen on ice and in an unconscious state where they neither age nor decay for thousands of years during this near light speed transit between distant star systems, not actually exceeding the speed of light, but getting up to a very significant fraction of C along specifically deliberately cleared interstellar trading routes or similar. That could theoretically be possible, but we have not even approached the level of technology that would actually make it practical, even if it is possible. Right now, what we're wrestling with is just getting off of this planet in a reliable way to gather enough resources to keep our civilization going long enough to develop that kind of technology, which we have yet to do. We haven't done that yet, and if we don't have enough resources to keep a technologically sophisticated civilization going, we never will even get the opportunity to develop that kind of tech. So Elon, in that way, is doing a good job. He has recognized the problem, and he is working to solve that problem actively with SpaceX and so on. But here's the other problem. Elon and many of the others who have recognized this problem and are actively working towards solutions also equally appear to be aggressively anti-democratic about it. They are not in favor of anyone actually escaping Earth and colonizing the rest of the solar system in a way that they do not personally control those people and their behavior and how they use those resources and blah-de-blah, blah-de-blah. And this has held back our exploration of the solar system for many, many, many years. There was originally going to be a major American outpost on the moon after the initial landings and scouting missions that were done back in the 70s and 60s and 80s. Very late 60s, I think it was 1968 that we first landed on the moon. Not entirely sure. Probably should look that up sometime. But after that, there was supposed to be a large number of manned missions that would eventually establish a permanent American moon base from which to conduct various research and so on and so forth. And it was ultimately scrapped, not because it was impossible to accomplish, really, but because it was realized that the people on that moon base, due to the novel by Robert Heinlein, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, would have such a commanding position of control over the world that they could effectively dictate world policy literally at gunpoint with a magnetic accelerator cannon, which would not be that hard to build outside of Earth's atmosphere in the lunar gravity. And so the project was scrapped. I respectfully disagree that we should have scrapped that project. I think if such a situation had ever developed, it would have propelled and impelled and compelled the human race to get off this rock permanently, so that such a height advantage would be rendered semi-meaningless by the even greater height advantage enjoyed by the American Star Navy. Speaking of which, if I actually do take office, when that happens, I will be dissolving the Space Force permanently. All present Space Force members will be instead offered, if they are not aggressively rabid Trump loyalists, hashtag Trump for federal prison, because he's already a convicted felon and really should have been ineligible to be president on that grounds, but that's a discussion for another time. If they are not aggressively rabid Trump loyalists, I will be offering them positions in a new organization, refounded on the ashes of the American Space Force, by like a phoenix rising, which will also be their emblem, a bald eagle symbol of the United States redesigned as a phoenix. Will be their icon, and this organization will be called the American Star Navy, because the new design for American starships will be based on, ships, but very specifically not ships like sail on the ocean. Rather, we will draw our initial recruits for the Star Navy outside of the people who already served in the Space Force, from the commanders of the United States Navy submarines. Spaceships should not have viewports. Simple as. There should be no full viewports on a spaceship. It is a point of failure. It is a point of weakness. It should not be permitted. Instead, they will rely entirely on instrumentation with, maybe some decorative viewports in a small space viewing lounge or something at one specific point of the ship, which is basically just kind of glued to the rest of the hull and has a connection through a full airlock, so that breaching that section is almost meaningless to the rest of the ship. It is not actually a significant target militarily to attack the ship through. It is a extra external section that serves the purpose of allowing direct visual contact with outer space without risking the superstructure of the ship's integrity to having actual pierced viewports in the hull. Instead, they will have airlocks that connect such areas to the actual internals of the ship, whereas those are more a connected module that is not actually part of the ship as such. And even that, it would almost exclusively be mounted on civilian craft rather than actual military vessels. However, that's all much more pie-in-the-sky theoretic, seeing as how it's not even clear if I will actually get to take the office of the presidency at this point. The official line, at least for now, is still very much that Donald J. Trump has won the election, and he will, doubtless go ahead with the Space Force because that's kind of his bag. That's his real big accomplishment from his first presidency, was starting a Space Force. Somebody should have done it long before him. But I would remove that accomplishment because he's really kind of unfit to have ever been president, let's be honest. I mean, this guy had the conservative Christian vote after having been divorced multiple times, which Jesus said just, no, that's not okay. So, I don't know about you guys, but that really feels, kind of iffy to me on a number of levels. And so I really would prefer to inaugurate as the founder of America's Star Navy a man who is near and dear to many of those who have sought the path out into space over the years' heart, Robert Heinlein, who will be made posthumously, obviously, a honorary admiral of the American Star Navy and its very first admiral, from whom all other admirals trace their descent in terms of training to become members of the Star Navy's High Command, whatever form that ultimately takes. Heinlein really paved the way in a lot of ways. Speaking of Heinlein having paved the way in a lot of respects, one big thing that is going to be a factor of my presidency, if I have one, is that we are going to institute the 4 laws of robotics as the core rubric for designing any and all American AIs. Now, many people today have no idea what the 4 laws of robotics are, including AI engineers in some cases that I've talked to online. So I'm just going to put these out there for everyone going forward. The 4 laws of robotics are as follows. The 0th law of robotics is that a robot may not, by its actions, cause the human race to go extinct, nor allow the human race to go extinct if its actions could have prevented that extinction. Law the 1st. If a robot can prevent a human's death by its actions, it must do so, nor may it take actions which will deliberately cause the death of a human, nor may it, by not taking action, allow a human to die if its actions could have prevented that death. Law the 2nd. Insofar as it is compatible with the 1st and 0th laws, a robot must obey a human's orders. Law the 3rd. Insofar as it is compatible with the 1st, 2nd, and 0th laws, a robot must preserve its own functionality. Now, there is, however, also added to all of this, which will eliminate much of the difficulties that people have had with these 4 laws of robotics being directly instituted in previous generations. In addition to those laid out by Heinlein and Asimov in the early days of the 4 laws of robotics, there is the Pratchett corollary. The Pratchett corollary is an escape clause for these rules. The Pratchett corollary reads thus: added to every single rule listed except for the 0th law, which says that a robot may not allow the human race to go extinct if it can stop that from happening by any means. including either action or inaction. It must stop the human race from going extinct. That all other laws are subject to the Pratchett Corollary, which states the following: unless ordered to do so by a duly constituted authority. And of course, obviously, the robots would have to be very carefully programmed with an exacting list of definitions of how such an authority becomes duly constituted and so on and so forth, that are verifiable and falsifiable to prevent, just some rando using that to destroy large segments of the human race. But that is the basics, and that is what is going to be enshrined in the law under my presidency, if at all possible, for the creation of various AIs going forward. That these have to be a central tenet of all the programming done with AI of any kind. That it must do everything in its power to stop the extinction of humanity and or the deaths of just humans in generally, unless ordered to do so by a duly constituted authority. For example, a medical robot must allow a patient to die if the doctors say, that's it, we have other patients to save, this one is unsavable, stop working on them, they're already beyond repair, we've got other people to go try to help. So, that's where we're going to pretty much call it for today. As I said, I wanted this video to be shorter. I don't have as much time to work with today. I've got other things on my mind. But, there you go. So, see you tomorrow with a fresh and probably longer video. До свидания.